By way of introduction, we're going to talk today about math mastery, and I am so excited to be joined by my colleague, Michael Sass. I will let Michael introduce himself momentarily. My name is Gretchen Rowe. I'm our Community Relations Coordinator here at Demme Learning, and I'm the homeschooling mom of 6. 5 of those kids are now college graduates, and the caboose in my train is about 13 weeks out from graduating high school. And so the world is about to change for me, just like it changed for all of you when you had your first child. Now I'm going to say goodbye to the homeschooling years, and that's going to be very interesting. We'll let Michael introduce himself, and then we'll get started.
I've worked with homeschool families since 2005. I've been with Demme Learning since 2014. I love working with homeschool families and talking about what's going on in their home and how maybe Demme Learning can help build a plan for their student to find success in math and other subjects. And so I'm excited about this hour. I'm excited to be here. I do have 2 kids. I have a almost 10-year-old and a 7-year-old. And yeah, I'm excited to be here with you today.
I'm just squinting and remembering when you became a dad. So I can't believe that you're saying they're almost 10 and 7. Only my children get older. Everybody else's children remain the same age. So we have so much to talk with you about today. And the reason that we are revisiting this conversation yet again is because this comes up so often in conversations we have with parents who are looking to begin a Math UC experience, or they find, as my German father used to refer to it as the Mittendrin. They're in the middle of a Math UC experience, and then they're beginning to question, so what am I exactly looking for? So we have a lot to talk about today. And I think where I would like to begin this conversation is to sort of set the rubric for understanding. Math UC is a different curricula. Because we are a true mastery-based curricula, we are different from the ones that you might have experienced in a public or private school, and different from many of our competitors in the market sphere. So Michael, can you explain what is a spiral curricula and what is a mastery curricula?
Sure. I think you're going to get differing opinions on what this actually looks like depending on who you speak with. But essentially, spiral learning will continue to build upon itself and reintroduce those concepts to review. But it's constantly moving, and it seems to be more fast-paced. I think some families like that. They sometimes feel like they're a year ahead of what other kids would be. They sometimes hear that terminology that they're going to be a year ahead if they do a spiral-based learning than a mastery-based. I don't know if that's necessarily true. I think they all end up at the same point at some point. Maybe they're teaching them at different times. However, with mastery, we see a lot of times you work on one thing until you understand it, and then you move to the next thing. And so even mastery, I've worked with a few mastery programs, and there are different definitions out there of what mastery truly is. So it is a confusing topic of what that really looks like, of mastery and spiral. And so I'm excited to talk about that today.
And I'm excited to have the opportunity for us to outline in some detail what parents can look for, because sometimes we make the misapprehension that mastery looks the same at every age, and it does not. It does change. Let me also say that the reason that we do these events is for you, our attendees. So if you have questions, I'm monitoring the Q&A. It's over here on my second screen. We want to make sure that we answer those questions as we go along today. So I am welcome to everyone who's joining us live. Those of you who will watch the video, I think you'll find merit in what we're about to discuss about. So Michael, when we talk about mastery as a conversation, let's talk about the difference between mastery and proficiency, because I know when I first became a Math UC parent, I thought those were synonymous, and they're really not. So can you go into a little detail on that?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, with mastery, I know there's some curriculums out there that say you have to get a certain percentage before you can move on. And maybe 80%, I think, is a very common one out there. Our goal at Math UC is not necessarily a percentage, it's building understanding. And so our goal for every student in every lesson is that they're able to practice until they're able to teach the concept back to you as a parent. And so the benefit there is, you know, for sure your student understands it. And so a lot of times within a spiral-based curriculum, you get a certain amount of problems before it moves on. We want the student to decide when it's time to move on, not the curriculum. And so you're only going to do, we have it set up to be 1 page of practice a day until the student's able to teach that concept back to you as a parent. And so you're in complete control to know when they have the built-up understanding into the concept and when they need to have a little bit more practice. And so the nice thing is you as a parent get to decide that and help your student understand how to study. I think that's a big benefit there is they know how to really learn a topic and not just simply get through a lesson.
You know, one of the things that our colleague Sue Wachter says is, if we as parents have the mindset that our children should always be prepared to teach us what they're learning, then it becomes easier. But sometimes as homeschool parents, we think our role is to impart wisdom and children are to absorb it. And we forget that it's a dialogue. And so we want to encourage you, as we say in every single webinar, that you are the best student of your student. So it should be through careful observation that you are able to say, oh, my student is ready to teach this back to me. And Sue further says that you shouldn't step into the review pages until you're sure your student is prepared to teach it back, because the review pages give us proficiency and automaticity with what we have learned. But that's not really the place to work out the understanding. That's what the practice pages are for. So Michael, can you explain maybe what proficiency and mastery looks like with an alpha student? And then I'll talk about an older student.
Yeah, absolutely. Alpha is a very unique level. It's the first true mastery level that we have in Math UC. And it's kind of setting that foundation. The foundation really being said, we're going to start off by teaching them how to count to 100. Set that foundation, because the first stage in math, we believe, is counting. And after you learn counting, we go to adding, which is fast counting. And then to subtraction, which is the inverse of addition. And so we are going to take the time to help students memorize their addition and subtraction facts. This is going to look different, as we have found one of the top reasons students struggle with math is that they count for their facts. Usually, most times when you pass first grade and you don't have your facts memorized, they typically never become memorized unless you stop to work on them. And what happens is we develop a habit. We develop a habit of counting on our fingers, using tally marks, number lines, a variety of different tools. And what happens as we get older is we have a problem in front of us and we have to look away to count. And when we look back at the problem, it gets easy to get lost or forget steps or overcount or undercount. And so we find a lot of value in really setting the stage of helping them learn those facts by memory, not by rote memory tactics such as drills or flashcards, but trying to develop understanding. And so we actually have manipulatives that they're blocks. They're all different colors and they represent different numbers. What I did with each of my kids is we took some time to help them learn the colors and the numbers before even jumping into a lesson. And I had them come up with nicknames, a way to remember them, because our goal is that we're going to use a multi-sensory approach. We're going to build it with the blocks. We're going to write the fact down and we're going to say the fact back. And so it's a very similar idea even to rolling a dice. You roll a dice, you get a 5. Your brain does not count the dots on the dice. It knows the pattern, and most of us can picture all 6 patterns in our head. And so if we have 3 plus 4, in my house, the 3 pink block is nicknamed the 3 pink little pigs. We combine that with our 4 yellow pineapple block to equal the 7 white vanilla ice cream block. And so they actually come to me and will say those names to me because they're so, they can picture them so well in their head right now. We want them to write it down. I played the piano for a number of years. And when I got to recitals, I played that piece so many times that I could picture the notes on the page without having the page in front of me. With a flashcard, what happens is you can show them the flashcard and they can take a snapshot of it, but there's no answer to it. And so they have a blank spot. The other thing that happens with a flashcard is if I sit across the table from Gretchen and I say, what's 3 plus 4? And she goes, 7. I say, great job. And she goes, 9 plus 6. And she looks at me funny. I say, come on, Gretchen, you got this yesterday. What's going on? She's automatically going to get stressed out. And when stress enters the body, learning stops. And what we find with kids is that they want to please their parents so much that they read our facial expressions more than anything. And so we try to put them into a place where they can do their best work. And so when they're writing it, they're writing the full fact down to build that muscle memory, and they're saying it back. And that's important. A lot of parents leave that out. But if you say what you observe, you remember 40% more than just looking at it. And so if you think about it, if you go on a walk with your kids and you point out some different things on the walk, maybe it's some flowers, maybe it's some nature, some animals out there, and you talk about what you're seeing, you're bound to remember that a lot more than things you just casually look at. And so we build, we write, we say. And so it's different in the alpha level because our goal is to stay on the lesson until those facts are memorized, and then keep reviewing them and to make sure they get stronger and stronger. And we do not leave the alpha level until all facts are committed to memory.
And, I have seen recently in social media, particularly with parents, by the time they get to epsilon in the math you see, or what would be fractions in some other curriculum, in math you see, epsilon comes after the computational fact sets of addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. And you know what? If you have a child who's beginning to work independently, when you reach that level, you assume, hey, come on, process this and you can go ahead and make it happen. But I'm going to tell you that as a parent, you need to be more engaged at epsilon than maybe at alpha. And the reason is because it's not just computational math. Now we're stepping away from computational math, and we have to think our way through and be able to problem solve on the spot so we know the best way to solve something. And that happens when we have dialogue with our kids. So when we as parents, and as busy homeschool parents, I know so many of you will understand this scenario. You say to your child, hey, here's a piece of paper, I want you to go do this, and we'll check it later. If they are doing it wrong and you didn't check it, then it's very difficult to attain mastery. So I would submit to you that it's better for you to say to them, all right, let's take a look at what you have to do today. Let's talk through the first problem. And then you show me if you understand by showing me the second problem. And then continue forward, because there's nothing more discouraging than to work on a piece of paper all by yourself and find out that you did it wrong. Toward that end, Michael, can you talk a little bit about why we design word problems to use them with the manipulatives?
Sure. I think one of the biggest struggles for kids are word problems. I hear that from families all the time, that they did well on the problems, but when they got to the word problems, that's where it really fell apart. And so, at a very simple level, if you had a word problem like Mary had 8 apples and Stephen took 2 from her basket, how many are left? Some kids can get lost in that story, and they might start to think about the scene that's around them. Usually very creative, very artistic students really struggle with this, because they start thinking about, what type of apples is Mary carrying? Are they Red Delicious? Are they Granny Smith? All of these type of apples that she could possibly be carrying. And then what type of basket does she have? Does she have a wicker basket? All of these things. And so I recommend taking time and asking questions of, what numbers did you hear in this word problem? Well, we heard the number 8. Great. Let's take out our 8 block. What does that represent? Mary's apples. Wonderful. Now, what other number did you hear? We heard the number 2. Okay. And what are we doing with the number 2? It's how many Stephen took. So when we take something, are we adding or subtracting? Well, we're subtracting. Okay, so let's take 2 blocks away from Mary. How many does she have left? And so the great thing about that is you can walk through a problem like that by asking very simple questions. And if they struggle with it, you can change that up the next day, changing it to be, Mary has 8 birthday invitations. She handed 2 invitations out. How many are left? We can do something like that where we keep the numbers the same, but we change the object. And this allows students to be able to get comfortable with it. One thing I've done with my kids even is we sometimes would come up with some very tricky phrases, and we'll put them on a chart and we'll say, okay, this is an addition phrase, or this is a subtraction, multiplication, or division, and allows them to see the type of wording that is in word problems for those operations. And so it allows them to get comfortable with it and start to gain confidence, because I think word problems are tricky for a lot of kids. But it's one of the most important, because that's why and Steve Demme says this all the time, we teach math so they know how to apply it to everyday situations. And so that's why there's a lot of word problems built into the Math You See curriculum.
Right. And as parents, you might not have been taught using manipulatives. I mean, I remember in grade school, back when rocks were soft, that the manipulatives were the things they pulled out on Friday so we could have something different to do. If you view these as a powerful tool and you are willing to submit to the learning process a little bit, you'll find an enormous amount of merit in that process. One of the reasons that we see struggle as kids become more mature is because kids look at these and they say, but they're for little kids, they're not for older students. And the truth of the matter is, as the math becomes more complex, when you can use those manipulatives to understand that math more thoroughly, it becomes a better outcome. So Michael, you had said in our planning session that you recommend that parents don't grade. You want to talk a little bit more about that? Because that might be a paradigm shift for some of the parents in our audience.
It was for me too. I recognize with math, a lot of times it's we grade the lesson, and if they did well with it, we move to lesson 2 and so forth. And when we get to the test, we hope we see a solid grade at that point. With Math You See, the way it's structured is we have a 4-step mastery approach. One of the differences with Math You See are the videos. A lot of people think the videos are for the students, when in fact, they're actually created for you as a parent to watch. The videos are very short. They're probably 5 to 10 minutes in length for the younger grades, maybe a little bit longer as you get toward pre-algebra. However, we want you to watch them. And sometimes what I do is I watch it first and I decide, is this helpful for my kids or is it not? Because sometimes I have one student that has, we adopted both of our boys. One has fetal alcohol syndrome with ODD and ADD, and math is very difficult for him. And so sometimes the videos are difficult for them to relate to, and sometimes it's very helpful. And so I kind of help decide what's helpful and what's not. And so my second point will be is I need to teach them how to do the concept. And so I'll take what Steve Demme said and help them understand that as I use the manipulatives to show them how to do that concept. And like Gretchen said, we recommend taking time for them to get comfortable with it, to ask questions, and get ready to do their work. After that, we have 3 pages of practice. They're labeled A, B, and C, and 3 pages of review labeled D, E, and F with a test page afterwards. And so we put a lot of emphasis on how much time a student has to focus. And usually about 15 to 20 minutes is about all that they have, even for math. And so it's going to seem like they're not spending a lot of time there. That's okay. What we want to do is make sure that we're not overwhelming the brain. Because sometimes if we do too much math, we can lose what we gained because we're working so much on the same type of thing. Where if we quit, our brain will continue to work on it even after we're finished. I think of it a lot. I do a lot of puzzles with my kids. Sometimes we just hit a wall and I can't find where any pieces go anymore. And so we take a break and come back, and pretty soon pieces are jumping off the table at us saying, this is where this one goes, this is where this goes, and we just take off again. Very similar things happens with math. We don't want to we don't want to overwhelm them. We want to help them understand what they're doing and take a break. So they're going to do page A. We're going to ask them that they use the manipulatives because, like I said, like Gretchen said, the manipulatives are there to help build understanding. So we're going to ask that they build it, they write it, they even say it, and they do page A. The next morning, I will ask them to try to teach me the concept. The point is not necessarily what % they got or how many they missed. We will talk about the ones they missed on occasion, but ultimately I want to know, are they getting it? Because they can understand the concepts and make a simple error in adding or subtracting or whatever. That doesn't mean they don't understand it. And so I want to give them an opportunity to teach it to me. It looks different for both of my kids. My oldest kid is a perfectionist. He's my Lego builder, follows the directions to the T, and will explain it as such. My youngest student, like I said, he plays pretend. He is my creative kid. He loves imagination. So he gets on his teacher outfit. He uses one of my ties, puts it on, gets out the marker board, and he teaches me that way. And they're vocabulary is very different. The way that they explain things is very different. And I just need to know, based upon that student, do they understand it? And if not, where are they struggling so that I can help them? Because my day's work starts with that point of what steps are they not getting? And let's just talk about those steps and practice again. And if they get it after day 2, they can skip page C. They don't have to do it. One of the top things I hear from parents is, I don't want my kids to be bored. They will never be bored with Matthew C because once they understand it, they can move on. So if they get it after page A, they can skip pages B and C. And then we go to the review pages. We take the blocks away because they've mastered it. Steve Demme always says that you can't take the blocks to the bank. At some point, you have to leave them at home, right? And so D, E, and F are review pages. Very similarly, we ask you to do 1 page a day. And if they struggle with any concepts, we take a break and we review them to make sure that we aren't forgetting or we're still having that understanding. And so we take a little break and help them do a few problems and then move on to the next pages. The test is really up to you. I've seen parents use tests in many different ways. I've seen them use it as a strict test of what do they know? Do they know it well enough to move to lesson 2 or what the next lesson? I've seen some parents save their test booklet for August. And they took June and July off. In August, they start with lesson 1, test page 1, and they do a quick 30-day review, doing all 30 tests in 30 days, and we start on the new level in September. It's really up to you on how you want to utilize it. Some will even use it as a 4th practice sheet if they need it. We do have additional worksheets in our digital toolbox you can print off for some of the lessons, but the test page gives you a definite extra page to do more work if they need it. So
absolutely. And Michael began Matthew C at Alpha. I came to Matthew C with my first student who was a pre-algebra student. So it's going to look a little bit different when I sit down with my 13-year-old and begin the process of instruction with her than it would have been with Michael sitting down with a 1st grader. And so we want to talk to you a little bit about that, because this is a process that will be a different paradigm for you, particularly if you have come from a public school background, if you are an accidental homeschooler, as there are so many who became homeschoolers in the pandemic and then you found you liked it, so you stuck around, or if you were like me and you became a homeschooler because the school was failing your student mathematically. In that context, you're looking for something different, but the process of learning to explain what you're doing is still the same. So I want to revisit a definition here because I want to make sure that you all clearly understand. And mastery is different from proficiency. And our goal is that you strive for both of those. A student who has conceptual understanding, in other words, they understand how to do what they're doing, but they're not yet proficient in terms of automaticity, is going to begin to struggle. And as a parent, it's up to you to watch for that so you can continue that dialogue and encourage them to think their way through the process. Now, if you all have joined me for a webinar ever in any time, you know that math is not my personal strong suit. In fact, I think math is spelled with 4 letters for a reason. But I want to encourage you that if you employ this process of the teach back and the mastery component, show me that you know so we can move on and do something different, you will find very different outcomes for your student. And I have now my 3 youngest kids did Matthew C all the way up into calculus, and there is absolutely no way that I could have helped them. But interestingly enough, because they had learned the process of teach back, I could certainly listen to them as they were explaining something to me. And so very often what you hear when you say that out loud is they're sitting there with a pencil and they're saying, all right, the first thing I had to do is this. Oh, I forgot to do this. You see what's happening here? They're becoming self-instructive, but because they're using that verbal component, and I have to tell you, I'm looking at the number of attendees here, and I'll guarantee at least 60% of you have boys, and boys absolutely hate the say it out loud. But if you can incentivize them and teach them to say it out loud, you would be amazed at how often they will begin to catch their own mistakes. there's a difference between a mistake of I added 2 plus 4 and got 7, and I added and I should have multiplied. So it's up to you as a parent to look to see what is happening so that you can guide them forward in that process. Michael, we had some really great questions. And before I turn my attentions to the questions, I wonder if I could get you to circle back for just one hot minute and talk about what Lisa talks about that 80% that you mentioned. What do you do with the 20%, and why is there value in making sure that 20% ultimately comes out right?
Even though we're doing the same type of problem, those problems are going to look different throughout the worksheet. And so it's important that we don't just say, well, it's good enough, because I find out good enough catches up with you eventually. And so I like to take a look at those and find, as a parent, look at them first of all and say, okay, is it the same mistake? Is it the same type of problem? Are they different problems? What's going on here? And make sure I understand, first of all, is this something that he just went too fast, or is it something that is a little bit more, there's something more going on? And so, yes, there's absolutely, it's knowing your kid. And that's where we always say, we trust you as parents to know your child and to know what they need to be successful. And so there's always a benefit to going back and looking at why you made a mistake. Because it allows, I think, even as adults here working at this job, it's important that I go back and reread an email before sending it, right? It's important that we think about what we're doing, the processes of what we're doing before finishing it. We have to go back and we have to make sure that it's correct. And so I think it's just teaching them that take the time to really understand what you're doing and why you made a mistake, and then you can move forward. It's going to help them be so much more successful in life. And as they go into college, community college, university, whatever it is, after high school. So.
And I have to tell you, we have a variety of resources that will be shared with you all when this video lands in your inbox at the end of the week. One of those resources I really want to encourage you to take a little bit of time with is a blog post that our CEO wrote. His name is Ethan Demme. And what Ethan wrote about is his blog is entitled, let me make sure I get it right here, The Case for Teaching Mastery. And I think it's a very valuable blog post, but if you guys are like me and a little bit on the attention deficit side, there's actually an embedded video there from Sal Khan from Khan Academy. And he's talking about why mastery is so important. And he's going to take everything that Michael and I have talked about for an hour and boil it down into 10 minutes. And I think that will be a good follow-up for you as a 10-minute exercise to really cement what we're trying to teach you all today. Michael, I want to turn my attentions now to the questions that parents ask us, because we had some really good ones. And one of them, I think, right out of the gate is, what type of assessments do we recommend to determine mastery? So if I'm sitting with my pre-algebra student, the way I'm going to assess their mastery is going to be a little bit different than the way you would assess your youngest student's mastery. So can you talk about those differences a little bit?
I think placements, and I know placement's one of the most important pieces that we have to determining success for a student. And so most of the time when I have a parent call in, they're not necessarily at the point where they think they're going to be. A lot of times there's a gap or something that wasn't quite understood previously that's causing frustrations today. And so what one of my goals is, or one of my chief jobs is to help parents find those gaps and build a plan to helping their student be successful in math. And so you're going to notice our levels are not grade level specific. They're based on the Greek alphabet. And the reason we do that is because you may have a 5th grade student coming in and they're learning about fractions currently, and they may have found that they don't have their facts memorized for addition and subtraction. That doesn't mean they're a 1st grade student. That just means there's something in 1st grade that we need to work on and to practice a little bit more to fill that gap. And so what we would do is we actually have some remedial programs called Accelerated Individualized Mastery. One is for addition and subtraction, one is for multiplication. that's designed to help older students memorize their facts, because as I said, they're not first or third graders, they're beyond that. And in reality, they don't need a lot of what's being taught in those grade levels. They just need to help memorize those facts. And so it's taking it from a different standpoint. We're not going to teach the surface level of what does an addition sign look like and a subtraction sign? What does it mean to truly add and truly subtract? We're beyond that. We're just going to try to get rid of the habit that they formed of counting and be able to build that long-term retention as they progress through math. And so once that's finished, what we will do is we have some assessments online that are wonderful to help you find that next level, but we also have assessments that we can email you that can be able to give maybe more of a in-depth look as to how they're doing. Because for instance, if you're doing fractions right now and you know how to add and subtract fractions, and we don't know how to multiply and divide fractions, we can work on just those areas. We have resources and ways to customize the curriculum to help students work on only the things they need to work on and get them back to where they left off. So you're not spending a lot of money on starting over and doing all these every level over again. We're just working on the things they need, which typically just is a matter of months and not years. And so a lot of parents call in and they say, there's so many things he has to work on or she has to work on. And in reality, once you fill in those gaps, other gaps naturally fill in afterwards. So once we get our facts memorized, sometimes the processes just start to make sense and we can get through that very quickly. And so our goal is to really work with you and develop a plan together to help your students be successful in math, you see. And if it is starting right at a specific level, we'll do that. We just want to do what's in the best interest of each one of the students.
Great. We have a great question here that says, what do you suggest when a child doesn't get the strategy or the method that's taught in a lesson? Do you believe it's okay for parents to teach using a strategy and method that works best for the child? And I'd love to be able to answer that. So the short answer to that is yes, absolutely. But don't discount the virtue of being able to use the concrete process with the manipulatives to move a child along the continuum that goes from concrete, the physical understanding, to the conceptual understanding, to being truly proficient. So sometimes as parents, and I know I can raise my hand because I was the guilty party, when I would first look at a math UC lesson, I would say, oh, that doesn't make sense to me. Let's just do it the way I know, which is an acceptable solution, except that what is important for you to understand is every math UC lesson is carefully linked together to build on itself. So if we are beginning to reject the process that's being taught in front of us, maybe there's a reason for that you might not see for 2 or 3 more lessons. So there's virtue there. Now, let me also talk about bandwidth within a child. When a child just absolutely becomes frustrated, Michael has already said learning absolutely ceases. So we want to encourage you to think about the process, the child and their age. And if they are 10 years old, you've got their attention for 12, maybe 15 minutes, particularly for new material. If they're not getting it, I'm going to suggest to you what my colleague Sue Wachter suggests. Close the book, walk away, and try again at a later point in time. Maybe that's the same day, maybe that's the next day, because it will be up to you to read that child to figure out what is the best thing for that child. Last but not least, somehow this is a hugely well-kept secret upon occasion, and that is that we support the math we provide. So if you have a situation where you have a child who's not getting it, and you've come at it from more than one angle, and you still haven't figured out how to make it work, pick up the phone, give us a call, live chat us, send us an email. All of those things are avenues to help you get past the frustration and reach understanding with your student. That was a great question and it being asked. And I have another one here that says,
Gretchen,
yeah.
I want to backtrack just a minute. I feel like I wasn't very complete on the assessments, and I want to re-go back to that. If you go to matthewc.com, we have a placement assessment right there on the website. One of the things that parents don't realize is even if you have a 7th grade student, it is going to start you at the beginning, because what we're doing is we're looking for gaps. So the first question may be something to do with counting. Recognize that's part of the process. Is what we're trying to do is we don't want to jump too far ahead where we miss gaps that are there. We want to truly make sure we know what we have an understanding of what your students do know and what they may need more practice with. If you do the assessment and you're not quite sure that's where you want to begin, you can call in to our general number, push number 1 for placement specialists. Myself and a few others on the team can help you identify where to begin. We also have some placement tests that we can email you with more problems on there that your student can do. And we can help work and find that first start for your students. So there are a lot of different resources out there that we can help identify that beginning point for your kids.
And I think there's a great observation that was made here. It says, can we please admit there are just as many girls who struggle with communicating regarding math than it's not a reason to just say boys. And absolutely, Michael just happens to have 2 boys.
I have 2 boys, and I do that unintentionally. Absolutely.
Are also boys. I also have 3 girls, and I can tell you that I have always been a hesitant mathematician. And so when I became a homeschool parent, I was terrified that I wouldn't be able to teach my children mathematically. What Matthew C did for me is it showed me where my gaps were and allowed me to fill those gaps. Now, I'm never going to sit down and do math for fun, but I have a greater proficiency at math and a greater understanding than I ever had in my own academic experiences. And if you are that parent, you can learn right alongside your child. That was a great observation. And I thank you for making sure that we talked about equal time for girls and boys. I have an observation here, Michael, that you can probably answer. And it says, my son just finished AIM for addition and subtraction, that green one back there behind me. And he's pretty accurate, but he's still reviewing a few sticky ones, but he's not fast at doing them. So should I make sure he's fast before starting multiplication, or is accuracy the most important? And I have an answer for that, but I'm going to let you answer it.
Yeah, and that's a great question. What we find a lot of times is at school, kids are asked to do mad minutes or do as many facts as they can in a certain amount of time. Well, that can be very stressful for a lot of kids because they may not be fluent with those facts. They may still have to count. And if you're asked to do something that you struggle with and try to do as fast as you can, no good can come from that, right? And so it is important to be able to know the fact that's in front of you well. And so the way that I say, we're never going to ask a child to do 30 problems in 1 minute's worth of time. What we're going to do is ask them to know the fact that's in front of them well. And so basically our definition of memorize is being able to give an answer in 3 seconds or less without counting. And so we do have an assessment that we can email you that you can give to your child and see how many facts are above 3 seconds, how many are below those 3 seconds. And we have to have a cutoff line at some point. And we have to also understand that your child, that 3 seconds may not be a fair number. So for instance, my oldest son has to repeat the fact. He's not counting, but he has to say it to himself. 3 + 4 = 7. It's just the way that he does it. So I give a second of grace there as he's doing that. And so what we want is if we have 18 + 14, we want them to know when we're adding the units columns, 8 + 4 is 12, without having to go 9, 10, 11, 12, or have some sort of hesitancy, because by doing that, like I said, it causes students to easily get lost. These causes them to forget steps or add incorrectly. And so then we're going to add the 10 to the next column, and we want them to know 10 + 10 + 10 is 30. And so we want them to be able to know the fact in front of them well. I also want to say, when it comes to memorization, continue to review those facts with them. Find ways to make that a weekly part of your time, and maybe while you're on a walk, maybe in a car ride, maybe play a game. I'm not sure. One of the games that I've played is the card game War. The war is where you both have half the deck, you both flip over a card, and typically the higher card wins, and your goal is to get the deck from the other person. In this case, if you lay a 5 and your child lays a 4, if they can add or subtract those within 3 seconds or less, they get the cards, otherwise you do, and their goal is to get the deck from you. Because there always are going to be some facts I think that take a little bit more time than others, but making sure that you continue to work on them each week to make them stronger and stronger is important, because otherwise I've seen so many times where parents did such a great job with their kids all year round. They got the facts memorized coming into May. We take the summer off and half of them are lost, right? It's not that we did that in vain by any means. It just means that we didn't take time to continue to review them and make sure that they stayed fresh in their mind. So now we have to do a little bit of backtracking to help them remember those facts again. And
so let me make a recommendation for this particular mom, because Tiffany has asked a question that a whole bunch of parents ask. Are we looking for 100% automaticity? You might never get there. I mean, to this day, when I think of 8 and 7, I have to say 7 and 7 is 14, plus 1 is 15. And I've been doing that since I was 7. So it's a few years. But the truth of the matter is, what you're looking for is moving forward, but continuing to practice. So I want you to think of this newly acquired fact set as muscle memory. And your muscles don't serve you well if you don't continue to work them out. So you have a variety of ways to apply games. Michael has given you the game of war. There's a whole bunch more in the digital toolbox. And sometimes it's just as small as saying, hey, buddy, before you go outside to play, let me ask you 3 math facts, so that you continue to keep those present as you move forward mathematically. Don't let it slide. Don't assume because they're memorized this week, oh, we got that done and I don't have to do that anymore. Keep that proficiency going. In fact, my favorite way to do that, because I have a very expressive face, was to put my kids in the car. They're in the back seat, I'm in the front. When the traffic light was red, I got to ask you math facts. When the light turned green, we were done. And that gave us an opportunity for proficiency, but it wasn't interminable. And it wasn't me sitting down with a whole stack of flashcards and saying, okay, I'm coming after you for all these facts, because that makes a difference as well. I'd like to turn our attention back to some of the questions that we were asked, Michael. And one of them I think is really helpful to understand is, I'm now in Algebra 1. How does my knowledge of addition and subtraction impact my ability to stay engaged with Algebra 1 problems?
Sure. A lot of times when we get to Algebra 1 and we see kids struggling, a lot of times I hear parents tell me their child looks disinterested, they look like they don't care, they aren't trying. I hear all of these things, and in reality, especially if they don't have their facts committed to memory, it's more that they're just overwhelmed, because their brain has to think about so many things at once. And I think about it a lot like where when your kids learn to read, they have to sound out every single word. And if I come around and ask a question about the book that they read, maybe what the character was doing or something else, more than likely they're not going to be able to answer that question, because their focus is so much on sounding out the words properly. When we get to Algebra 1, we start dealing with large problems that may be 10 to 15 step problems that may have multiple ways of solving it. And if I have to look away, or I have to think about the fact and adding those, subtracting and multiplying, whatever it may be, to 75% of the facts, it's going to take me a long time to get done with a problem. It's going to overwhelm me. And I'm going to get burnt out of doing math very quickly, because I can see my peers or maybe my siblings going much faster and getting done quicker. And I'm still far behind because it's taking me so long to get through a problem. And so it's a lot of times not any of the things that we think it is, where they're not trying or not caring. It's just that they're overwhelmed. And it gets tiring very quickly. And the way Gretchen puts it is, every child has a certain amount of battery life for every problem. And if that battery gets drained quickly because of all these extra steps that we're doing, it's very hard to get through it.
And frankly, at Algebra 1, that's the time where you watch the instruction, you have a conversation with your student, and if they say, I'm not getting it, then you close the book and you come back at a later point in time. Because muscling through is not going to yield you a better result. And I think it's very important for us to understand that there's a lot more things that go on when we get beyond the fraction, the decimal, the pre-algebra, the algebra 1 level and beyond. We are asking kids to assess their performance, make decisions about how they're going to solve things. And in order to be able to do that effectively, they need to have a solid foundation.
I worked with a family recently. A mom called me and said, my daughter's at the table crying because Algebra 1's so hard. And we talked for quite a while, and I found out what was going on. And we started off by saying addition, subtraction, facts. And mom was a little skeptical going back that far. But she said it's worth giving it a try. And so we worked on her facts, helped her get those up to speed in about 4 months. We then did the multiplication facts in 2 months. We found out she was good with all multiple digit of all 4 operations, so we could skip all of that. She had a tough time with fractions, especially fractions with mixed numbers. And so we worked on that for 2 months. We could skip zeta, decimals, and percent. She did wonderful with that. And we did a little bit in pre-algebra. And after about 9 to 10 months worth of time, I gave her the Algebra 1 readiness assessment to make sure she was ready for Algebra 1. And she got 100% on it. Her mom said she did a cartwheel down the hallway. She was so excited. And so that's what we live for. Those are the type of stories of trying to help kids find success in math, because we may find that your student may not be a math person. He or she may really not enjoy doing math each day, but that doesn't mean they can't be proficient with math. And so we try to really help each student work on the things they need and have a successful math career, basically, as they go through high school.
So let me give you a paradigm if you're thinking about this and you have a child, particularly a young lady who is very artsy. And often we have parents who say to us, oh, my daughter is very artistically oriented, so she's not good at math. And I'm here to tell you that just like this quarter has a head on one side and a tail on the other, math and art are integrally related. So if you have a child who you have allowed to think they are not going to be successful mathematically because they love the world of art, it's time to revisit that conversation, because there are enormous numbers of students who are very successful both mathematically and artistically, and you can't disconnect those two. It's just up to you as the parent to figure out what the combination lock is to be able to reach that student successfully. Michael, we had a really interesting question here that I think is really important about knowing when to push ahead and knowing when to review more. So can you maybe dive into that a little bit more in depth?
Yeah, and I don't think there's a really black and white answer, to be honest with you. I think it really depends on your student and and how much time you spent on it. For instance, my 2 boys, my 7-year-old, really struggles with math to a huge degree, where it is tough to do it each day because he just doesn't like it. And it's a battle in most days. And so there are some things that I realize are going to be difficult for him, and we move on when I feel it's ready for both of us to move on. That doesn't mean we don't ever come back to it later on. It just means that we need to do something different. Math facts, I don't think he'll ever have them fully memorized. My oldest took 1.5 years. And I have different expectations for each child. That doesn't mean I don't expect them to do their best and to have things down to the best of their ability. It means that what success looks like for each one of them is going to be different. And so this comes back to, we trust you as a parent to know what's best for your kids. And if you need to take a little break from math altogether, go and do that. If you know you can spend a little bit more time, because sometimes it's more that me as a parent doesn't want to do it anymore because I'm just sick of math facts or whatever else we're working on, more than it is that the child needs to move on. And so I think a lot of times it's just helpful to have a conversation with you and your child to see where they're at and what would be helpful for them, and to include them on this process as well. And to say, is the way that it's being taught helpful to you? Would it be helpful to take a break? Would it be helpful if we did this, that, or the other? Whatever it is, just helping to know. You as a parent, unfortunately, is the best person to know when it's what the right thing to do is. And I'm a firm believer that if we do the best we can for our kids every single day, things will work out for them in the end. And so that's actually one of our things is, we had a saying a year ago is, we have come so far. And every day we talked about how we can do hard things. And if we can do these hard things, we can come so far. And so it's a conversation, it's a work in progress. I don't think there's a right or wrong answer to that. But if you think there's room for growth, continue to expect that for your kids.
Absolutely. Having that conversation, that mathematical conversation with your children is vitally important. And I want to say just something very quickly about expectation, because I think sometimes we inadvertently set our kids up to be frustrated because our expectations are they should be able to do something and they're not quite yet ready to do something. So it's really comes back around to what Michael and I said earlier about you being the best observer of your children. I'll use my own two kids as an example. My eldest son was brilliant. He taught himself to read at the age of 4. He finished the 4th grade before he turned 8 years old. But mathematically, he could not do a single math problem on his own without me sitting beside him until he was almost 17 years old. That didn't mean he wasn't mathematically proficient. It didn't mean he didn't understand. But the challenge that we sometimes have is we tell ourselves, the stories we tell ourselves are, I'm not good at this. And so our threshold for frustration is very, very low. And so by me sitting there and encouraging him, he was able to be successful. He went on to college, put himself through college in 3 years, did very successful mathematically, has owned his own business, and has done very well for himself. But the reason I tell you this story is because then you fast forward to my youngest child, who said to me in the 4th grade, how about you just give me a list and I'll let you know if I need you? And those kids exist in both households. It's up to you to observe carefully to figure out which one of those kids the child sitting next to you is, and don't leave them to their own devices until they're ready to be left that way. Here's a good question, Michael, for you to answer for me. And it says, I've put off starting high school science until my child has a better grasp of addition, subtraction, and multiplication. How do I know when it's time to start some science? And I got an opinion here, but I'm going to let you answer this because I think it's fun.
No, absolutely. I think trying it is always an important piece, because sometimes my kids surprise me at what they know and sometimes surprise me at what they don't know. And so sometimes when you just have that hunch of let's get started and go for it. And if it hits to be a big struggle, to take that break. I also am a firm believer as they're in high school to give them that more independence as far as allowing them to decide too, do you want to get started? Do you want to get started in trying this course? And like I said, if it becomes a struggle, take a little bit break. I understand that, math and science are closely related and you need both to be successful, but sometimes students really can take off and even math can start to make more sense because of what they're learning in science. And so, yeah, it's a hard thing. I understand it's a very difficult thing is to know when to get started, but I would say if you've been putting it off, it may be good to just jump in and see what happens.
And if you have a child who has a high interest in areas of science, then focus on those areas, because that high interest helps kids remain engaged.
Right.
And I think that makes a tremendous amount of difference. The last thing that Michael and I talked about, because we both have kids who are rather neurodivergent, is to recognize that your expectations need to be framed around your child's attention span. So recognizing that if you have a child who thinks math is less than fun, you're going to need to be more engaged than you would be with a child who enjoys the process of math. So as parents, framing our expectations appropriately is really important. Michael, I can't believe we've reached almost the top of the hour. Do you have any closing thoughts for our families?
I think, with this whole conversation of mastery, is that I think it's a very freeing topic. It allows me as a parent to make the decision when it's time to move on, and not the curriculum dictating it. Just because we're up to lesson 2 next doesn't mean we have to do lesson 2. We can decide when we feel our kids are ready. I think it helps prepare kids well to be successful in life, because it teaches them to know not to settle. I think honestly, it allows them to know I can build understanding, I can do hard things, I can be able to figure out how this process works, and not just go on because it's a new day. And so recognize all of these levels that we have. Some may go really quickly, may not take a year, some may take longer than a year. And I found that to be true. The alpha level, like I said, with my oldest took 1.5 years. The beta level, we got done 3/4 of a year, because things just started to make sense and he started to figure things out, and it went very quickly. And so, yeah, I think mastery can be a very freeing concept for parents. And I will say one last thing. The reasons I didn't see Matthew C being successful in homes are only 3 reasons. It's either we placed them incorrectly or they're placed incorrectly. We're not using all the components. We're not using the manipulatives. We're not watching the videos. We're not walking through the worksheets as we should be. And then thirdly, we're saying it's good enough. You've mastered it good enough. And so if you look at those 3 things and we got the right placement, we're using everything as it should be, and we're truly waiting for mastery to happen, you're going to find success with Matthew C.
Absolutely. So I want to, in closing, circle back to some things that you guys have said, and just to sort of tie a bow around the package. And that is, if you have a child who's older, a child who is stepping into long division and fractions, now might be the perfect time for you to begin a math notebook. And often parents will say, how do you take notes on math? But being able to analyze what they are doing wrong and take some notes about, all right, when I multiply fractions, I have to remember that my product is going to be smaller than where I started, is going to make a huge difference for kids. And starting that math notebook now will serve them into their high school years and beyond. So if you have a student who has gone beyond the level of computational math, now would be a perfect time to begin to figure out that process. I want to also say thank you all to all of you who attended live today. We really do appreciate you. We have lots of information on deck upcoming in the coming months, and we hope that you will join us for those events. You can find them posted on our Demme Learning events page. And if anything that we have said today has sparked interest in you and you're looking for other information, there's a fantastic webinar contained in our blog about math and the artsy child. So if you have a child who's an artist and you're trying to figure out, how do I make this work, maybe that would be great homework for you. Thank you guys so much for joining us today. I appreciate all your commentary. Knowing that you all were engaged in the process makes it so much more rewarding for all of us. So thank you so much for your time, for trusting us to come into your homes. And if you have a moment and you'd like to drop us an email and let us know what you'd like to see us talk about in the coming months, we'd love to hear from you. Take care, everyone. Have a wonderful afternoon.